But this is a case where Putin really has BS'd him, obviously, way too much. And at some point, Trump knows when he's been strung along. You know why? Because Trump loves to string other people along. He knows that game really well. And so he can spot when somebody's doing to him what he likes to do to others.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've had Chuck Todd on the program. He's a former MSNBC moderator and podcast host. We've spoken about this backflip from Donald Trump on his friend Vladimir Putin. He says Russia is BSing the US. So we speak about that and what that could lead to if this anger from Trump could actually lead to his own aid package being sent to Ukraine, because we know that the aid package from the Biden administration will probably run out in the next few months. We speak about that. We speak about CNN reporting that Donald Trump last year threatened to bomb Russia and bomb China if they invaded Ukraine and Taiwan respectively. So we speak all about that. We speak about a few security breaches in the White House. So all that today on the Trump Report. You can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube page, or you can stream us as a podcast anywhere you get your podcast. Chuck Todd, a former MSNBC host and moderator and host of the Chuck Toddcast. Thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
Nice to see you, Maddie.
Let's get into this, I guess, switching gears from Donald Trump. We always knew he was unpredictable, and that's kind of what people have said is the saving grace in the way he governs, and the fact that he will always swing back to what you want him to do. But basically, he's finally condemned Russia's President Vladimir Putin for stalling peace talks, for continuing his bombardment on Ukraine. He told reporters, "We get a lot of BS thrown at us by Putin. If you want to know the truth, he's very nice all the time, but turns out to be meaningless." So, Chuck, I want to get your reaction from this change of tune from the president.
Well, I mean, this is something that people around him have been trying to tell him for years, not just months. But I do think because he's thrown himself into this, he thought he did give Putin everything he could have possibly wanted. And each time he did sort of treat him pretty poorly, right? Just sort of took advantage of him and was playing him. And the thing with Trump, it's interesting with him, and this goes back to his business days. He knows people play him, and he almost lets it go for a while. And then there's a moment when it's over, it's over. And so there's a chance this is never fixed. And in fact, Putin may have totally miscalculated here, because he had the most, probably, there's no American president that would have given him the wide berth, would have given him the respect he's been looking for than Donald Trump. And if he blows this relationship, and I think he is blowing this relationship, and I think he really, in this case, he may have underestimated people around Trump. He may have underestimated Trump's zeal with being seen as a peacemaker. And whatever it is on this one, I do think that while I think nothing is set in stone here, and he could flip tomorrow, and if Putin, frankly, was smart, I'm not going to get into what I wish would happen, but if Putin were smart, he would retreat in a hurry and throw him some bones and try to appease him, because this could lead to, look at what Putin's done. He's now got Trump praising NATO. He's now got Trump helping to get more NATO, almost rewarding NATO countries for increasing their defense spending. So, look, this has been a strategic, total miscalculation by Putin. I think he thought Trump wasn't as serious about trying to get peace. I think he thought he had already sort of won over Trump's base on the issue of Ukraine, which for a long time I think he had, where a lot of Trump's base didn't believe Ukraine was worth the fight. But this is a miscalculation. Keep one other thing in mind. Trump is surrounded by people who are more skeptical of Putin than he is. Marco Rubio is in his ear now all the time, right? He's the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State. And he's been a Putin skeptic pretty consistently. Lindsey Graham is very close and has been working him on this. So I think the fact that he is surrounded almost as much, yes, Pete Hegseth is in another direction, but I don't think Hegseth has Trump's ear. Marco Rubio does.
And as you point out, it was interesting to see that takeaway from the NATO summit, Chuck, because the NATO summit, it came back with so much positivity over the allegiance between all the NATO members. It was a very stark contrast to when Trump up and left early from the G7. But I wonder, do we think that Trump is coming to his own conclusion that Putin is not his friend, that peacemaking deals and cordial conversations are no longer going to get what he wants, that this is a dictator whose entire operation is to invade and occupy a sovereign country?
I do think this is Trump coming to his own conclusion because, look, Trump is a very binary guy. And the reason he was pro-Putin is because Putin was pro-Trump. Okay? If you're nice to him, he's going to be nice to you. And I do think, in hindsight, when we all look back at 2016, was the Russians definitely wanted Trump to win. The question always was Trump willingly accepting it, or was this just happenstance, right? He was the other candidate, and Trump was just trying to help him win. It didn't matter. As far as Trump was concerned, Putin was with him. So I think for a long time, he really saw that. And the enemy of his enemy is somebody he viewed as an ally. That is just, Trump thinks very binary. But this is a case where Putin really has BS'd him, obviously, way too much. And at some point, Trump knows when he's been strung along. You know why? Because Trump loves to string other people along. He knows that game really well. And so he can spot when somebody's doing to him what he likes to do to others, which is string them along for as long as possible before he has to make a final decision.
And any expert or anyone that's come on this show, Chuck, has basically said Trump sees a lot of himself in Putin, in the way he wants to govern the US, or you can call it a dictatorship or whatever you might want to. But I wonder if this anger and this almost feeling of being offended by the way that Putin has recently treated Trump will turn into something else. It will turn into Donald Trump throwing his support completely behind Ukraine, replenishing the stockpile to Ukraine. And I don't mean the ones that the Pentagon put on pause and that they're now sending over to Ukraine, but actually sending a Trump administration package once the Biden administration package runs out.
There's your real test, right? Let's see if that happens. Because I don't think there's enough Republican support for that. So it would have to be bipartisan support, and it's likely there. But, relations are really bad right now in Congress across party lines. I mean, it's just as bad as it can get. So I think that's going to be the real test, and that's when you know whether Trump truly has sort of had it with Putin. I do think that Trump believes Putin, and I think what's happening here is that Putin believes they're equals, and Trump obviously does not think they're equals. And I think that's, this is a reminder, sometimes, Trump is a believer in the laws of the jungle a little bit, right? And he's like, I'm the big guy, and you need to pay more deference to me. And the fact that Trump isn't paying deference to him, I think, also is offending Trump.
Do you think there's correlation between these two speaking and these attacks? Because so last Thursday, Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, they had this phone.
The disrespect of that.
Yeah, they had.
That was pretty disrespectful.
Well, they had this phone call. He spoke to Putin before he even spoke to Zelensky after the Pentagon paused aid, which I thought was not a great move from Donald Trump in showing whatever allegiance. I mean, it's unsurprising, Chuck, but it still didn't look great. But they had this phone call only hours after this phone call, which Donald Trump said basically he got no progress out of it in terms of ending the war. Hours later, Russia orchestrates their worst attack on Ukraine to date. And then on Tuesday, Donald Trump says that BS comment about Russia's always giving the US BS. Russia then launches its next largest attack on Ukraine, 728 drones, 13 missiles. So I wonder, is this correlated? Is Putin really testing Trump's patience?
I think actually Putin's testing, I don't think Putin respects Trump's resolve. And I understand why Putin doesn't, because we haven't seen resolve from Trump very often. But I do think there's something else at play here that Putin is not fully appreciating. I think Trump feels emboldened by what he believes was a success with Iran, not necessarily in getting rid of the nuclear program, right? There's some questions about how much of it did they destroy. But the bigger thing that happened is Trump has exposed that Iran was a paper tiger, right? There was no, they really had no response, and they weren't going to be able to challenge the situation militarily. And I think that is where Putin better be careful here, is that I think Trump, feeling his oats a little bit, is starting to wonder, well, maybe there's no there with Putin either. And I think right now Putin is betting there's no there with Trump, right? Putin is betting that with all the rhetoric, Trump doesn't have the stomach to give more weapons to Ukraine. He thinks Trump is, and he's been counting on this. I mean, this is another thing that's always hurt Zelensky is, remember, Trump has always viewed Ukraine as a political enemy, right? Because it was Ukraine that was behind the first impeachment. So he's never fully viewed Ukraine as an American ally. He's viewed it as a Democratic Party ally. So he's never seen it fully in the same way most American diplomats have seen Ukraine. And if that starts to change, and this is what Putin's been counting on, and if that starts to change, and this is and I do think he's been testing Trump's resolve. We'll see. I don't know if Trump has the stomach to rearm Ukraine himself and to essentially test Putin's resolve on this. But we may be about to find out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. I'll be more confident Trump wants to do this if he does pass his own weapons package for Ukraine. And the thing is, we're a long way away from any conversation about that.
Which is sad, Chuck, because from what analysts will indicate is that the weapons will probably run out in the next 6 to 12 weeks after the summer of offensive. And it's quite clear that Russia is not slowing down in terms, they're actually ramping up. But in terms of Putin taking Trump seriously, I thought this was interesting, and you've probably seen it, the audio release from CNN revealed a 2024 conversation at a private fundraising event Donald Trump recorded with some pretty startling remarks about what he told both Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. For our audience and listeners, he said, with Putin, I told him, if you go into Ukraine, I'm going to bomb the out of Moscow. I'm telling you, I have no choice. Then he goes, I don't believe you, but the truth is he believed me 10%. Trump then said, then I'm with President Xi of China. I said the same thing to them. I said, if you go into Taiwan, I'm going to bomb the out of Beijing. He thought I was crazy. He said, Beijing, you're going to bomb Beijing? I said, I have no choice. Look, Trump's White House spokesperson responded that they never denied the comments. They just reiterated Trump's stance that there never would have been an invasion in 2022 had Donald Trump not been elected in 2020. But Chuck, do we believe Trump when he says this, that he would have done this?
I don't at all. I mean, Trump is very, usually the giveaway when Trump's making up a story is when, usually he'll add in, well, the person says, sir, we can't do that, right? Whenever he uses the word sir, he's really manufacturing a fishtail. I'm sorry, he has a reputation for making up stuff like that all the time. So I think it's hard to take that very seriously. And my assumption is he wouldn't have said that. And if he had said that, it would have leaked out. His White House, people forget that first term, that White House leaked like a sieve on everything. Every phone call leaked out. So I'm skeptical that I'm sure he said it at a fundraiser, but that's the type of thing. Like, Trump loves to tell that stuff. By the way, I do think that it will probably be NATO that provides weapons to Ukraine for a while, and the United States then replenishes NATO ally countries. Like, that is going to be until there is a direct package, I do believe we will the arms will keep flowing from NATO allies in Europe, and the United States will replenish those. You will do separate deals with those NATO allies. I think that is unless or until Trump seeks his own package to aid Ukraine, just for what it's worth.
And then the other option is NATO or Europe using that interest made on that frozen Russian assets and buying US weaponry. But it's just more a question of, is there enough stockpile, the way the Pentagon...
Well, there's stockpile issues, and there's, just timing and logistics, right? I mean, there's no doubt that Putin wants to, Putin is... It does seem clear that the Putin strategy is to put himself in the best possible place when they begin negotiations for some sort of ceasefire, right? And the problem is he's not seized enough land where he thinks he's in a good negotiating position. And what are we are? We're in July. One would assume we only have about 3 or 4 more months of real fighting season until winter kicks in.
And they are moving slowly, the Russian army. But just going back to this audio recording, Chuck, obviously you and I look at this and think, okay, of course it's just, comments coming out of Trump. But
Trump being Trump.
I do wonder if at least Putin would take that seriously, only in the sense that now that the United States has actually followed through in bombing Iran,
Right.
would he think that Moscow is now an actual viable target?
I think until, I don't think he believes it, or his behavior would change. I don't. I mean, I think if he believed that Trump's posture had really changed as much as Trump is rhetorically saying right now, he'd get there. But I will tell you, I just, it is also, we always forget, we assume that the people we're talking about are using the same logical thinking that we are. And we don't know what Putin's thinking, right? We don't know what kind of manufactured intelligence he's receiving on this. But it does strike me that Putin is operating as if this is Trump first term rather than Trump second term. And I do think it's a different Trump. He absolutely feels as if he is, I don't want to say untouchable, but pretty close. He feels that kind of confidence these days.
Of course, there's this option of providing the US more weaponry, which seems, Ukraine more weaponry, I should say, but that seems to be the harder thing to get through, especially on the basis that it was such a testy subject at the 2024 election when it came to MAGA constituents, Republicans who are really sick of funding other wars, which you can completely understand. But then the other option is, of course, using economic measures to basically cripple Russia's economy, which would stop the war. Now, you and I spoke about this off camera, but the Senate, they're resuming this week.
Yes.
We now know how many drones and missiles Russia have been bombarding Ukraine, especially in the last few weeks. So I wonder, is it high time for the Senate to be passing Lindsey Graham's sanctions bill? For anyone who doesn't know what it is, it's this 500% tariff on any country importing Russian oil. It would very much cripple Russia's economy. Oil is a big contributor to the economy. I think it's about 20% of the GDP. It would mean that Putin couldn't afford to pay his soldiers, probably wouldn't be able to afford to have any more weaponry, missiles. So, Chuck, how much of a priority do you think this will be for senators? We know there's about 85% of the senators that have co-sponsored this bill, but do you see it going through?
I do. I think there's some people not crazy about giving Trump so much authority over when to start and stop the sanctions, right? Trump said he wanted a bit more. He wanted the language to change so that he would decide when they begin. Essentially, Congress is going to pass this sanctions regime, but it doesn't begin until Trump says so. And he can pull it back anytime he wants, which, of course, is the way Trump likes to unilaterally be able to say, hey, I can do this, and he likes to be able to do it that way. So, I do think you would assume that in this case, Trump likes to have leverage, and passing this bill would give him leverage. But I'll be honest, I'm a tad skeptical of all these sanctions bills. We've been sanctioning, I'm numb from all the different sanctions we put on Russia. We sanction this, we sanction that. Hadn't really worked, right? We've done all these sanctions on China. Hadn't really worked. We try to keep technology away from China. What did they do? They figured it out themselves. So I'm a bit skeptical unless you're going to enforce, and that's the other question. How are you going to enforce these sanctions? Because we've had these sanctions on oil off and on ever since he did the invasion, right? But what weren't we doing? We're not enforcing it. Everybody turned the other way when they knew who was taking Russian oil, and the Gulf states have been buying Russian oil, right? India's been taking Russian oil, and we want to have good relations with India. So I'll believe this when I see it, of how biting these sanctions are. But just having the fact that he's considering it, which is something he hadn't been considering before, is certainly a step.
Yeah, and I do wonder, Chuck, how much sway it shows Lindsey Graham has over Donald Trump. I just think that there's such an allegiance between these two.
I wouldn't call it sway, but I will say this about Lindsey. He sort of has a one-track mind. He's been trying to do this, and he is I'll give him credit. He has played the flattery game with Trump better than most, and he takes the incoming, right? I mean, he has been humiliated publicly by him multiple times, and he keeps coming back for more. And ultimately, when they've, he has dragged Trump and some of MAGA before when it's come to Ukraine. So, he does have a way with finding his way into Trump's ear more often than others do.
A bit of a change in tune, but this week, Donald Trump, he ended his 90-minute cabinet meeting this week where he started talking about how he'd renovate the ceiling, the cabinet room with the gold leafing, referring to the crown molding around the ceiling. I'll play a clip for our viewers.
Painted the room a nice color, beige color, and it's been really something. The only question is, will I gold leaf the corners? You could maybe tell me my cabinet could take a vote. You see the top line moldings, and the only question is, do you gold leaf it? Because you can't paint it. If you paint it, it won't look good because they've never found a paint that looks like gold. You see that in the Oval Office.
Oh yes.
But people online, they were pretty furious about the conversation as he's asking his fellow members of cabinet, well, what do you think? What would you do? Quite a few people online are calling this incompetent, basically saying this is such a reflection on the administration and the fact that they aren't taking national security seriously. So, I mean, this is nothing new for you and I because we're consuming so much Trump news and have been for a number of years. But Chuck, when you saw this, what did you think?
Well, I mean, it's just he's got these weird obsessions, right, with architecture, and he's also kind of like a squirrel, right, which is meaning, suddenly it's like, oh, look at this, right? Oh, look at that. Oh, look at that, right? He immediately can have the subject changed on him in a hurry, and he kind of, I do think there's usually a method to this madness. He'll start to go off on a tangent, like about, oh, look at the gold leaf, that's beautiful, or why are you wearing that? It is a tactic. He is trying to avoid subjects. He is trying to change subjects. There were certain questions he was being asked that he didn't really want to deal with. And the more he gets those questions, the more he'll start to meander. So I do think there's something to that. But, he's got some weird taste. You know what I would love to see? I'd love to see him walk around Buckingham Palace and start talking about, well, I would do this and I would change this. Because he would do this. I mean, he ought to go on Queer Eye or something like that. Go on one of these like shows because he would
do well to get that voter base, like Chuck.
Yeah, I think he cares more about some of these aesthetics on big buildings than he does about healthcare policy.
I mean, Mar-a-Lago is a very old school interior design. Certainly not my taste, but
he has one view of what looks good, right? And it's sort of like it's some like. Yes, it's some 1950s version of like gold leaf, and it's always gold, right? And every one of his clubs, I've been to quite a few of them over the years, they're all the same. His taste is all the same, and it is sort of right out of, I mean, it is a stereotype of what people thought rich people looked like in 1947.
It's actually so true. It's when I sometimes go on Zillow and look for rich houses, which is just a hobby of mine. The exteriors, the houses are absolutely stunning, and then the interiors are Donald Trump's taste, quite literally, with the big. But just speaking of national security, the U.S. State Department is currently investigating an imposter who used AI to impersonate Marco Rubio, including his voice, contact 3 foreign ministers, and also a member of Congress and a state official through Signal, aiming to gain sensitive information or access to certain accounts. Now, we don't know who exactly they contacted, but there were no breaches made in terms of what information they got. But after the Signalgate drama, Chuck, and of course then that moment when the White House accidentally released 200 people's social security numbers, I'm wondering, does the Trump administration have an issue with national security?
Well, I don't know if it's an issue, but I don't think they care about it, right? When it comes to cybersecurity, and this goes to, I think it's a little bit of paranoia with some members of the Trump administration. Why does the intel community tell us what devices we can and can't use, right? There's a little bit of that, but the stubbornness of this administration to not giving up their personal cell phones, to not giving up. I mean, it's sort of shocking to me because I've done this 30 years. And the amount of, you know, when you deal with, usually when you have these White House contacts, you have to get it. There's always a new cell phone, and there's, hey, you can't text me on this. You can only call me on this. Send me an email here, you know, because most everybody, in my experience, has actually followed security protocols. They're not doing it at all, and we have bigger threats now, right? With AI, we still haven't figured that out, and you know, I think anybody, you know, right now, I have a feeling AI scams are going to be, you know, we'll in the same way, you know, the Nigerian prince email scams of 20 years ago, right? The AI scams will become a version of this for a little while, because we're all still learning, you know, how to figure that out. But like everything it has been shocking. And it's really surprising to me when a guy like Marco Rubio doesn't take it seriously, because he was on the Intelligence Committee for so long. He is somebody that seemed, and he has had his stuff, you know, when his presidential campaign materials was stolen by the Russians and then used. And so he's usually, you'd think, a bit more sensitive, in the fact that he's still using Signal. If this is what this story is implying, it's a huge problem, considering.
We need to ban Signal.
Yeah, I guess that it's like, you know, I'm not looking forward to that. I'm tired. I don't know about you. I have like 8 or 9 different communications apps because I have all these sources. Well, I only use this and I only use that, you know. Here's what I would ask. Can we all go on WhatsApp? That seems to be the safest.
Truly, I'm thinking, like, do these members of Congress, these members of the Senate, do they have are they shareholders in Signal? Like, what is this commitment?
Well, Signal, I will say this: Signal became a DC thing over the last, I would say, all of a sudden after RussiaGate, okay, when all the phishing scams happened and so many, everybody went to this Signal. It became sort of the go-to encrypted app that everybody downloaded on campaigns. So it became a DC thing for a while.
And now it's just no one is safe. Chuck Todd, thank you so much for joining the Trump Report today.
All right, Maddie. You got it.